received online. What's the difference between Christianity and any other religion, as they all believe they are correct? And that's a fair question, right? What separates Christianity from everything else? Is this just a nice, different country club, just like everyone else has? This should highlight kind of a problem in our churches today. Oftentimes we don't talk about this. We just work on the assumption that Christianity must be real because there's so many people in the sanctuary, right? We don't ask critical questions. And sometimes if we ask critical questions, we don't get critical answers. We get stories, we get testimonies, we get beautiful, beautiful happenings to people that do not do anything for us. So I can think of like someone asking this question, like, how do you know Jesus is true? And then they're going to be like, well, because I prayed and then my body felt warm, and that's how you just know. That's not something for me to walk through life holding on to, right? Like, oh, but no, this one lady felt warm, so that's why I'm going to heaven. That's not good enough, right? The Christianity demands a lot from us. There's a lot of things that Christians don't get to do. Christians don't get to like go out on drinking venues and get drunk and have a party life, right? The Bible kind of forbids that. There's a couple of other things like holding grudges that some of us really like to do that we don't get to do. So Christianity asks a lot of us, and we should equally be able to ask a lot of Christianity. I shouldn't be persuaded by other people around me to just simply believe because it's easier, right? We have a saying around here, anything worth believing is worth questioning. And it's very true. If you guys are going to invest your time into a class in college, if you guys are going to invest your time in a career, if you guys are going to invest your time just in a workplace, right? And the paycheck is not assured, or the class is not necessarily accredited, should you invest your time in it? Should you work at a job that's like, we might pay you? Are you going to research that at all? You're going to be like, well, I guess when I get there, I'll find out. Would you enter a career field that's like, it might exist by the time you graduate. No, you're not going to invest your life into that, right? You're not going to take a class where the teacher goes, I might be your teacher. This might be an accredited class. We'll just find out. We want to invest in things that are rock solid. We don't want to waste our time. We want to be able to walk into something that, why'd you point at another student? Oh no, you're taking non-accredited classes now? No. He's like, I was in my third year too, and I just didn't know. I didn't ask the questions.
We just might be losing our accreditation.
Man, it's the court on blue all over.
I didn't even touch on a sore spot there, dude. I'm so sorry.
I think they'll keep our accreditation because we're like 1 year left, but I don't know about the next one.
Brother, I would like to encourage you through tonight's study unintentionally to seek out the truth and make sure before you invest any more of your time, if you can. If it's worth striving towards, it's worth asking questions of, good sir. So, that's so bad. This doesn't mean that Christianity doesn't also require faith. This is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Like, if God doesn't take a selfie with me and tag me in the photo, I'm not going to believe. This is not an excuse to be like, well, God never made himself known to me, so I'm not a Christian and it's his fault. This is not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about is the fact that faith should be paired with seeking. Faith should be paired with us looking for the truth. Not us being lazy, us being studious. If truth is out there, and I believe that God is the truth, then the truth should stand self-evident. And I should be able to discover the claims and the validity of those claims by chasing after God, right? Hebrews 11:6 says this, is half quoted, and I love that. It says that without faith it is impossible to please God, right? Oh, all of us know that part. We all know that it's impossible without faith. Because anyone, it says, who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly, what?
Seek him.
Seek him. How do you seek someone?
With your eyes.
You try to go where they're supposed to be. You look for them. You do a little research on, they have this soon-to-be unaccredited class in their daily life. I'm going to go find them. There should be action that accompanies our faith. And that should be the seeking of truth. That should be the seeking of God and what he has said and what he has given us. So tonight I would encourage you guys with this. Grow your faith, not only through waiting to follow God, through some unknown that he leads you to. That's a great way to grow your faith. But on the flip side, Also grow your faith through studying the truth actively, right? Sometimes life's going to throw things at you that you're just going to have to walk through in faith. I don't know why I lost my job. I don't know why my class lost its accreditation. I don't know why I'm sick. And you have to walk through those things because God's leading you through them. But also in the in-between times where everything just seems sunny, you shouldn't be sitting on your hands going, well, I mean, yeah, cool. I'm enjoying my life. We should be trying to put in our roots deeper for when the next storm comes, right? When the next big thing comes to blow us over. So let us begin by seeking out the truth in a big question. Can Christianity and other religions both be equally true? How many of us have heard this one? It's funny, they took a poll within years in Lifeway. It's two big Christian companies, and they polled evangelical Christians and Christians of all different denominations. And they're like, how many of you guys think that God receives worship, even if it's Jewish worship of Judaism, Islamic worship, in their religion, Christian worship, any religion? How many of us think that all that worship goes to the same God? 56% of Christians said they do. There are now more Christians in churches, or Christians claiming to be Christian, who believe that all pathways lead to God than there are who do not. That should be frightening. That should be a big wake-up call to the state of Christianity. That should be a big wake-up call that we're not asking these questions like, is Christianity even real? We're so uneducated in what Christianity is that we see no issue with all paths being the same. Let me ask you guys this. Have you ever heard of someone like Oprah say this? It's really nice sounding, right? Everyone in the crowd goes, woo! Love that answer because it requires me to do no study and change in no way. And I get to be around all my friends, no matter how they act or what they do or what they claim.
You get salvation.
You all get salvation. Exactly. This thought is a celebrated ideology amongst many celebrity pastors. And the New Age, spiritual, not religious type people. Can we all just worship God under different cultural names? Through different cultural practices? Who cares who you're praying to so long as you're praying, right? Pray for good things, guys, and we can all get along. Do you guys see any potential issues with this ideology? What? What do you see, Richie?
One, everyone defines good differently.
Everyone defines good differently? Yeah, that could be a sticking point. What else? I'm gonna go elsewhere.
It depends on whether or not truth is subjective.
Depends on whether or not truth is subjective, absolutely. Hey, Richard, can you turn on the front lights, dude? Just so that people can see a little bit and so I can see them. Anything else? Hannah, what you got? There are major doctrinal differences? Yes. Don't quote scripture at me, we're getting there. Anything else that's not scripture? Don't jump ahead of the program here. Anything else? Great. Awesome. What are our goals? How are we supposed to reach them? How do we treat other people? There's a lot of difference, right? I don't know Christians who have been instructed to go on jihad. Sorry, that's not very sensitive, but I don't know many Christians who think polygamy is great, but there are Mormons who do. There's a lot of lifestyle differences, aren't there? So if we're going to say that every truth is equal, well, then they also, like Richie said, have to be relative. They'll have to be some sort of good in a different vein, and every religion has to be mum on what the other religions consider to be good. So, we get another problem with this process of thought in John chapter 14, verse 6, which I believe is where you were going with this, good young sir. Jesus answered and says this, I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. The problem is that this is a claim of exclusivity. Jesus does not say, I am a way, a truth, or one path to God. He says he is the, emphatically, and he claims to be the only. Jesus makes the claim of exclusivity. In addition to this, the teachings of Christianity, like we mentioned before, clash extremely hard against the claims of other faiths, extremely often, quite frankly. Because of this, we know, right off the bat, something really important. If Christianity is true, then none of the other religions can be. This, however, is not a proof of the reality of Christianity. This does not make Christianity true. It just means that Christianity doesn't play well with other religions. That's where we're standing right now. In fact, Christianity could be not true, and those other religions could also be not true. So we need to, instead of looking at other religions and just poking holes in their stuff, because I see a lot of people do that, they're like, well, is Christianity real? Well, because in 1972, Joseph Smith, I don't know, but they're just going to poke holes in other religions. They're not actually going to tell you why Christianity is legit. That doesn't help. They could all be wrong. We should not be focusing on just trying to poke other religions in the ribs and make them look bad. We're not trying to embarrass other people. We're trying to prove that we have something that is more than just an embarrassment in our lives. So I want to start tonight's study with that linchpin that if Christianity is real, nothing else can be. Therefore, we should be trying to spend our time to prove Christianity. And the linchpin of Christianity is who we're named after. Does anyone know who that is? Christ. Well done. Jesus. Yes, Jesus Cristo. What makes us believe, guys, that the Bible didn't simply create a character named Jesus? What better proof do we have than just he's a figment of our imaginations? That they invented this man in wonderful stories of his works just to have a good enough person so powerful that everyone else would believe in him. And bang, suddenly you have a get-rich-quick scheme disguised as a major religion, right? And that's one of the most leveled criticisms of Christianity. Is well, what if it's just fake? What if the Pope made it up one day just so he could have a big throne in Vatican City? What if pastors just keep selling this off so they can get paychecks, right? That's one of the biggest complaints against Christianity. Also, if this guy Jesus even really did exist and really did signs and wonders, then wouldn't there be proof of it? Wouldn't we have extra biblical proofs? If he really was here and if he really did, even some of the stuff that were, maybe considered parlor tricks, if he did that and people were convinced it was real, and he really drew crowds of 4,000 and 5,000, and he really was a big political figure, wouldn't there be outside of the Bible writings about this? I mean, we have news articles about Kanye West every day right now. There's going to be some written evidence that this man existed, right? If Jesus really did all these crazy things, there's going to be some proof that he was actually there. So, are there? The answer to this question is yes. Yes, there are. In fact, there's secular proof or non-Christian proof of the existence of Jesus that came from people that weren't his followers. We have discovered the writings of people who simply chronicled the life of Jesus as a topic of interest in the life and times of the Roman Empire and the Jewish community. So our first proof of Christianity today, why it's different, is that we have extra biblical historical writings as proof. We have other outside entities talking about what Jesus did that we can compare the Bible to. Because the Bible says Jesus did a windmill dunk on a 12-foot court. And we're that's the cool thing. That's how we get saved right there, is the belief in that windmill dunk. And then no one else wrote about it. They're oh yeah, Jesus, he was a carpenter's kid. He sold used cars. He's a nice guy. Well, that doesn't exactly line up, right? We have to have some proof that at least some of the big things that happened in Jesus' life are historical. So the first person we're going to look at, and that's that first picture, guys, is Titus Flavius Josephus. This man right here. As you can tell by the size of his hat, he was quite important and well off. He was born the son of two very influential Jews. And early on in life, he was very proud of Jewish culture. He was on the Jewish side of a conflict. In those days, there was a conflict between the Roman Empire and Israel itself. Because the Romans were coming in trying to run the world, trying to subjugate people. And the way they did that was to go, you can keep your religion, you can keep some of your power structures, but you're going to pay us taxes, and you're going to do what we tell you to, and don't get out of line. For the most part, this worked pretty well. When it came to Israel, there were some sticking points. Anyone familiar with the siege of Jerusalem? Yeah, pretty crazy. Jews took a last stand, real nuts. You read about it in an extra biblical book called Maccabees. And this guy right here was actually alive during that time. This guy is very easily verified during this date and time because he worked for the Emperor of Rome. He worked for Vespasian. I'm sorry, these names are going to get wilder as we go on. And he was an advisor to that guy's son Titus. So Josephus wrote about the history of the Jewish revolt against Rome, as well as the era of Jewish culture that included the rise of the Christian church. He was an eyewitness to some of these things. Josephus's works are the chief source next to the Bible for the history and antiquity of ancient Palestine, and provide a significant and extra-biblical account of such figures as Pontius Pilate, Herod the Great, the Jewish king, puppet king, but John the Baptist, James, and Jesus. And he wrote of Jesus in his written works, The Antiquity of the Jews, and claimed that Jesus was a wise man and drew many Jews and Gentiles with his teaching. And this is significant because Josephus was not born when Jesus was doing these things to witness it, but he was born right after. Jesus died in about 33 AD, And Josephus was born about 4 years later. So as he was growing up, as he was witnessing people, he was able to actually meet people who were like, oh yeah, I was there when Jesus did blah, 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 blah. Oh, I was there when the apostles did this thing or that thing, or when he healed a man like Lazarus or brought him back from the dead, right? They can say that they were there, and this man can say, really? And the crazy thing is about this is that it's really hard to fudge the details when they're surviving eyewitnesses, right? It's really hard to fake things. So even the latest written work of Josephus was completed right around 94 AD. That's about 61 years after the death of Jesus. That is very easily a lifetime. Very easily within the realm of a lifetime for someone to have met Jesus as a young person and read all of the works of Josephus and verify them. It's impressive that we have these writings. It's impressive that Josephus was able to chronicle these things because of that short frame of time. Again, it's incredibly difficult to lie to people while they're still surviving eyewitnesses to the life of Jesus. The chances that not only the Bible was getting away with lying about who Jesus was and what he did, but also Josephus lied about these things is incredibly improbable. It'd be such a huge, crazy conspiracy, right? Again, Josiah, if you were up here and you're like, dude, I saw it, dude. Bush flew the plane into the towers. How many people are going to buy that? Not many. We know he's still alive right now. There's some eyewitnesses to what happened on 9/11, right? If Hannah was to come over and lie about something that happened in the past 10 years, she's like, no, actually, Elon Musk was not the inventor of blah, blah, blah. It was actually, she pulled some name out of a random hat. We're going to know you were wrong based on the fact that there's still writings from people who saw that transaction go down. We saw the transaction go down, right? You're not going to be able to fool us. For context, I want to tell you guys about something that happened in history not 1, but 2 years ago. So 1 extra year ago, and we'll see how it would fit if I try to lie about these things. If I told you guys 62 years ago, and this is the truth, Vietnam, the war of Vietnam broke out. It's when it began for the U.S. Could I convince you now that I wrote a book that's entirely historical, chronicling the end of the Vietnamese War, when Chuck Norris swam across the Pacific Ocean, screamed America, and throat punched the Viet Cong leader, Pikachu? Could I convince you that that happened? Look, I have a photo. It's historical, guys. It's black and white, and it looks grainy, and has some... Can I convince you that it happened?
Absolutely.
Who believes in my new religion?
I do.
Not only that, I have more proof. I have a picture of where he still lies today, guys. Check it out. How many of us are going to convince people of this truth? Not many. Why? Some of our grandfathers fought in Vietnam. Do you think they're going to buy that? They'll be like, oh yeah, I think I remember that. No. Not only that, but they probably pass some stories along to their kids and grandkids, right, during their lives. Do you think they're going to be able to fool any one of those kids or grandkids with this made-up story? No. So we have Josephus telling us stories about a Jesus who did crazy things in the Bible. And the disciples claiming that Jesus did these amazing things. How would they have sold these lies as truth so close to the actual happening date? They really wouldn't have been able to get away with that very easily. Not only that, but you might say, okay, well, he was Jewish. So, he was holding it down for the homie Jesus. He saw someone he didn't necessarily agree with, but he's like, for the motherland. So he let it slide. We have another person who wrote about Jesus and about the church. We have that picture, Kate. Does anyone know who this is? Tacitus. Tacitus was a Roman politician, right? And he lived from 56 to 120 AD, again, kind of near to the life of Jesus. He's considered by many scholars, secular scholars have lied, to be one of the greatest Roman historians who ever lived. He refers to the execution of Jesus in his writings by Pontius Pilate in his book Annals. In this book, he also tells of the Great Fire of Rome, which in the early Roman Empire resulted in Christian suffering immensely. They got blamed for this fire, and they suffered persecution under the rule of Nero during this time period. And we're talking about horrific stuff, about being fed to beasts, being hung, being lit on fire alive to light gardens, right? He wrote this, though, in his book, Annals. He says, "But all human efforts, all the lavish gifts of the emperor, and the propitiations of the gods did not banish the sinister belief that the fire was a result of an order Subsequently, to get rid of this report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. This man, again, was secular, not a follower of Christ. And he doesn't seem to be stepping in and going, how could they do this? He's just simply very neutral and taking down what was going on. What happened? There was a big fire. People were spreading rumors that it was Nero, which, probably was. So he shifted the blame to the Christians, and then they got really, really badly mistreated. So thus far, both of these accounts come from pretty neutral parties. But there's another great proof that actually comes not only from a neutral party, but from one who is in opposition to Jesus. The Babylonian Talmud is a writing that chronicled the history of the Jews. The Jews are really good about writing down their history. We see that all throughout the Bible and in extra-biblical documentation. And they wrote down some really important parts of their theology and religious beliefs, but they also recorded such things as the life of Jesus. And they claimed that Jesus had misled a great many Jews. And they also said that he had been crucified. So even those who had vested interest in discrediting Jesus recorded the impact that he made. It's really, really hard to discredit the belief that Jesus actually existed as a man because of these writings. It's really hard to discredit that the Bible just made up a ton of stories when some of the biggest stories, like the crucifixion of Jesus, are also verified by independent sources, such as these historians or these people who are actively against him. So again, with so many writings, it's difficult to dissuade people that Jesus ever existed, but none of these sources attribute godhood to Jesus. So we can also ask whether or not Jesus was really the Christ. If he did exist, great, but it doesn't make him the Christ. Now, some might say that these writings also have been tampered with. Others might say that these writings alone simply prove again that the man named Jesus lived and died horrifically. It does not prove that the Bible is legitimate, or that Christianity can be trusted and treated as valid. In particular, we can look at the Old Testament and try to discredit Christianity, right? Because most of this stuff is fairly recent. This is all New Testament stuff that we're talking about. So if we want to look at written works, Rome was really good about that too. They had a lot of culture going on. They were good at record keeping. Let's look at what happened to the Old Testament, where some of the wildest stories took place. Can you guys think of any stories that are a little bit wild in the Old Testament?
Yeah, speaking donkeys.
We got talking donkeys. Yeah, I don't remember that in the New Testament. What else?
Oh, you said Old Testament.
Old Testament.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The donkey.
We got talking donkey. What else we got, guys?
Having a picnic while God is literally sitting on top of a mountain and they can see him.
Yeah, seeing God. That doesn't really happen in the New Testament. What else?
Killing all the men, women, and children.
Killing all the men, women, and children. We have a whole study about that one, buddy.
Elijah summoning.
Fire falling down from heaven. I mean, that happened kind of a lot with some prophets, right? We also have things like global floods. These are a little bit harder to verify than some dude walking around named Jesus, right? So if I was going to attack the Bible and I want to be like, yeah, Christianity's a religion, just a religion, it's not a true religion, I would start with the Old Testament, because those stories are downright wacky. Those stories are harder to verify because they happened longer ago over a greater period of time. Most of the New Testament, guys, is being written like less than 100 years after Jesus' death, because we have the stories of people that were there with Jesus, and then the resulting impact around the area of Rome. And in the Roman Empire's missionaries go out, and as they kind of tell them about what Jesus wants from us and what churches should look like, right? So the New Testament's written over a much smaller amount of time than the Old Testament. The Old Testament stretches from a creation story all the way through the history of Israel being enslaved by people like the Babylonians and stuff, right? So there's a greater amount of time. There's some crazier claims. So if we're going to look at the Bible and try to take it as historical, we should be looking at the Old Testament and to see if we can discredit it there. Sorry, this is pretty double-sided, so. Yeah, right here, cool. So if we want to prove the Old Testament, we're going to have to go a little bit deeper than just writings, right? Because there isn't a whole lot of living written works from that period of time. And again, some of these stories are really big and massive, or they're taking place over a long period of time, like let's say Kings, right? King David. That would have some evidence, hopefully. He had a whole lifetime, basically, as a ruler, right? He had like 40 plus years, so there would be some sort of signet, there would be some sort of a pottery shard, there should be some sort of a, we found a ruin of a castle or a temple or something that bears his name, right? We would hope to find some of those things, but these are more about archaeological findings, right? So let's dig into archaeological findings, not just extra-biblical written accounts, though those exist for the Old Testament too. Again, when reading the Old Testament, it's easy to imagine that the strategy of someone who's trying to be shystery and try to fool other people is to go out and make up stories about your own nation. Because again, we're reading the works of who? The Jews. Mostly Moses, many believe, in the Old Testament. And he's talking about who? Himself and other people who are Jewish. So if I was going to write an American textbook on American history, and I wanted other people to be scared of me, dude, I would write the craziest stuff, right? I would talk about having, robot mechs in World War II. I would talk about how we, nuked aliens in space and saved the world. I would talk about all these things to make America look amazing. And all our leaders were heroes, and all of us were 6'2" with rippling six-packs and all this good stuff, right? So why didn't the Jews just do the same thing? We can start with that assumption, right, that they decided to infuse greatness into the Jewish nation through mythology. Again, if Israel wanted to be seen as a really cool nation, then they would make up a really cool God who did really cool supernatural things to simply make themselves appear legitimate. So let's look at some of the things we can find to prove that the Old Testament happened not just in a grandiose, let's make up kings and warriors and wars type way, but in a way that is verifiable. Some of these things are easier to talk about, such as them finding a little pottery shard. It was of a jar. And on it there was an inscription. And it was really exciting for people because they found this, I think in 2020 or 2019. And they dug this thing up, and on it had an inscription, and on it was the name Jerub-Baal. Jerub-Baal. Does anyone know why that's important? Probably not, because I didn't. Not that. No, that's a different thing.
Gideon?
It is Gideon! Dude, you know it! Well done! It was Gideon! It was a title given to Gideon before he was a war hero. Before he had done anything great, God was working in his life, and he goes down, and you know what he does? He tears down an altar to Baal, a false god. And everyone looks at him and they're like, you're screw up, whatever. We're going to leave you to be dealt with by this God. And that's what this name basically means, was that he will be contending with Baal, that he will be under the judgment of Baal, right? This pottery shard is dated to 1100 BC, which the Bible records as the period of the Jews following judges. So you don't know who the judges were. They were people that led the nation in time of great trouble because they didn't have kings. They were a theocracy. God told them what to do and they did it, right? That's what their nation was like. So to find a pottery shard with the name of a judge on it is a pretty big deal. Because again, back then, not a lot of writings are surviving. Back then, there's not a lot of written record. A lot of people wondered whether or not these people were even literate, mostly, in this time in history. And yet we find something that has an inscription on it. I'm sorry, this was discovered in 2021, my notes say. That's even cooler. That means that if we had this study last year or 2 years ago, we couldn't have cited this. They had to dig this up more recently. I find that super fascinating. So, this is mind-blowing. This is a pretty big deal because this backs the biblical record. That this is found in a place and in a time that makes sense. Before this, we didn't have any record of Gideon's life other than the Bible. And for a lot of us, it's funny because we grew up in a time where we have a lot of proofs that have been discovered in the last lifetime. So when people used to read the Bible, they'd read about unverified people groups that we've come to now find out are real. Or if they were reading the Bible and read about Israel, before a certain point in I think the 50s, right? Or the late 40s, it was a made-up place. Israel didn't exist before World War II. It had passed out of existence. It was reading about this mysterious place that maybe once had existed, maybe not. It'd be like us reading The Hobbit and being like, oh yeah, it must have been great, I guess. Or us reading about a place that has since passed, like Babylon. If we read about Babylon, we'd be like, oh, I'm sure it was a place at once, but I can't point to it on a map anymore. In our lifetime, Israel came back into existence, or not our lifetime, but in a lifetime, Israel came back into existence. So we're reading about things and still making discoveries that are still showing God to be true, and history is still passing in a way that shows God to be true. So another thing that we have found, guys, that backs the claim of biblical history are the seals of kings and rulers. And these seals would be placed on hot wax, to show that the king or the queen or someone important had ordered this to take place. Or it had been sealed with this signet so that it would only be opened by who it was intended for. Basically, the penalty for doing something that was against the wish desires of something that carried a seal was death. So we can find these rings and these signets and these seals as we look for proof of the Bible. Let's go to that first picture. We have found the seal of a king named Ahaz. And this king was found, this was the king of Judah, and he's found in 2 Kings chapter 16. Pretty neat, pretty cool, right? We have also found the seal of a servant of King Jeroboam. That's the next one. Or actually, no, I don't think that's the next one. Let's keep that up there, though. Jeroboam was spoken of in 1 Kings 11. This picture right here is of a seal from someone who's really notorious in biblical history. It's the seal of Jezebel. That's nuts, right? That's super crazy. Because that means this person probably existed. And Jezebel's like mad crazy. Of all the people that can be made up, Jezebel seems like one of the more far-stretching ones. Like, no one's that crazy. No one's that wicked. Yeah, apparently we can be. So that's Jezebel's seal, which is really, really crazy to me. We also found, and that she's mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 16 through 22. We also see King Hezekiah spoken of in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. And in 2019, we actually found the seal of a man named Nathan Melech. And I had a picture of that, but it didn't go on the computer. I'm sorry, Cade. And he is spoken of only once in the Bible. This servant is actually mentioned by name in 2 Kings. It's crazy. Even these minor figures in biblical history we mentioned once, we can find evidences of. If the Bible is simply making things up, I guarantee you we wouldn't have found these things in the right places, dated them to the right times, and they would not have been putting up servants' signets. They would have been putting ones for more important people, right? So many of these findings really show us that the Bible is talking about historical figures, people who actually walked and ate and lived and breathed. And it shows us the Bible can be confirmed with a great deal of confidence. That as we claim in Christianity the Bible to be the foundation of what we believe, we are standing on something that has a real cool track record of historically accurate accounts of the way the world used to be and world history. But, again, just because these kings existed, these queens existed, things like that, it doesn't exactly show the hand of God, right? It just shows that maybe it's a cool record book, and maybe it kept records and then just threw in a couple of fables. American history is like that, right? I've never seen Babe the Giant Blue Ox. Never met John Henry. So maybe most of it's true, but some of it's not. Because there's some really crazy stories like world floods. There's crazy stories about guys surviving in lions' dens and stuff like that. Do you know that we actually have some evidence of one of the crazier ones? Can anyone tell me which towns were destroyed by fire from heaven? Sodom and Gomorrah. Very famously, right? What happens in that story? People are sinning, things going wrong, let's keep it PG. And what does God do?
Fire and brimstone.
He sends fire and brimstone from heaven, it says, right? How many people survive? 3. Lot and his daughters. That's it. And they only barely did, right? They got out just in time. Lot's wife got out, but she turned around and turned into a pillar of salt, according to the account. So that sounds pretty crazy. Could I convince you that someone turned into a pillar of salt today? Oh yeah, Cole is here, but he went back to the donut table on Sunday a 3rd time, so he turned into salt. Who's going to buy that story? This sounds crazy. Who's going to believe that fire fell from heaven for no reason? That sounds nuts. Especially because I've heard a lot of Christians talk about this, and when people ask about it, they're like, what do you think it was? And people are like, it was probably just like an asteroid. It's probably not exactly what God said, but it was something similar. That's how they interpreted it. Do you know that we actually found Sodom and Gomorrah? We actually know where it's at. It's pretty crazy. This is one of the most incredible stories of destruction in the Bible because it is not done by human hands, it is done by the supernatural. Here's what the biblical account says happened to them. Genesis 19:24-28 says, Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all. Those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back and she became a pillar of salt. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and returned to the place where he stood before the Lord. This was on the west side of the Dead Sea. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. Don't know how many of you guys are looking at fireplaces right now because it's getting cold. It's pretty distinct to see smoke rising from a house. It'd be kind of crazy and unmissable if an entire civilization of two cities was just like, right? It would have been quite the scene. This to me would be an unbelievable story if I was reading the Bible as a critic or as a skeptic, right? Yet when we go look for it, we find that in fact it did leave a bit of a mark. And we found it. We know again that Abraham was viewing the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah from the west of the Dead Sea. And sure enough, near the Dead Sea, we found city walls and large structures that had very unique signs of cataclysmic destruction. Let's take a look at that first picture, Cato. That's what we found. I want you guys to note something. It's not just the TVs. Do you see the color of the hills behind this versus the color of everything else in front of us? One's a bit lighter. Have you guys ever seen rock get burned before? Gets a bit lighter, it turns out. It's a pretty crazy thing to look at. Again, you can not only see the destruction, but the altering of the color of the earth here. In the back, you have those much darker mountains. In the foreground, you have structures completely reduced to ash. This ash was tested, and it was found to be composed of calcium sulfate and calcium carbonate. And guess what? In the presence of sulfur. Control tested. That's what you get. This is consistent with the walls of the time being made of limestone, predominantly, and sulfur from heaven burning down. Genesis 19:24 tells us again that the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the heavens. And not only do we have charred remains of the city, but we've also found the sulfur. Give us that picture, Cato. Those are sulfur balls. Those sulfur balls, if you dry them off, will still burn if you hold a lighter under them. And they found that when you burn them, they turn gelatinous. God napalmed them. God napalmed them. These balls of sulfur do naturally occur, particularly near volcanic areas. We do find them. Do you guys know what the Dead Sea is not? A volcanic area. So that one doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In addition to that, not only can sulfur balls be found, but these sulfur balls are quite different than all the other ones we found. If you find sulfur balls from a volcano and stuff like that, geologic stuff, they're usually composed of about 40% sulfur. Do you guys know how much pure sulfur is in these?
100%.
Just about 96 to 98% pure sulfur. That's that good. Even secular scientists have said that this must be what the Bible recorded, though they attribute the sulfur balls and destruction to a fault line. And they theorize that it bursted open, launching these extremely hot balls onto the city, destroying it. That, my friends, is an acceptable answer in my eyes. I don't care if God split a fault line and that sulfur fell on them, or if He created it midair. It doesn't make a difference to me. In our story, we have God predicting it, God getting people out just in time, and then what He said was going to happen came to be in the way He said it was going to. I really don't care how God works it out. This is evidence that the Bible told us something that was factual. The point is that the Bible gave us, again, reliable witness accounts of something that is historically verifiable. On that note, guys, I would also like to raise confirmable prophecies in the Bible. Fulfilled prophecy is something that the Bible should have if it is indeed not just a history book, but something supernatural. So I want to look at one of the best, most verifiable biblical prophecies in all of the Bible. Does anyone know where that is? Gwen should know. Gwen, where is it? Jacob, where is it? I mentioned this quite a bit. Hannah? Andrew?
Can you rephrase the question?
Can you define the word? That's fine. Good. I'm not just seeing. You know what? Go tell me.
Is it the flood?
No. I mentioned this quite a bit actually, and I've never gotten to dive in it, so I'm super excited that I do. All right. What's your name? No, yeah, you.
Eden.
Eden, I am sorry that this is going to be long. We go over this quite in depth sometimes. It's going to be a little bit fun, so stick with me, okay? If I get a little boring, hang with me. This was kind of an odd time for you to join in with this group, but I hope you're enjoying yourself. The prophecies out of Daniel chapter 8. Thank you. Someone remembers, that's okay. Daniel chapter 8 gives us an incredibly exact prophecy. I'm going to read it to you guys here, and this is why I'm apologizing. It's a long portion of Scripture. It's a little bit boring. Bear with me. It'll get better as we go. It's a prophecy given during the reign of the Babylonians, a major empire, who Israel was subjugated to. They were in captivity of the Babylonians at this time. And they would later be destroyed in the book of Daniel in chapter 5 at the hands of the Persian Medes. But this prophecy is being recorded in the 3rd year of the last Babylonian king by David. And it says this. We're going to go from verses 3 on until verse 11 if you're following, or verse 12 if you're following along. And it says this: I looked up, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns, standing beside the canal. And these horns were long. One of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. I watched the ram as it charged towards the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased and became great. As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came up from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. It came towards the 2-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and charged at it in great rage. I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. Verse 8. The goat became very great, but at the height of its power the large horn was broken off. And in its place 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east and towards the beautiful land, set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. It grew until it reached the hosts of the heavens, and it threw some of the starry hosts down to the earth and trampled on them. It took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. Because of rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and the truth was thrown to the ground. This sounds very poetic and crazy, right? Sounds like, okay, well, that's beautiful language. I don't know how we're supposed to verify that happening. Stars falling because of goat's horn. Turns out Daniel didn't exactly know what they were talking about either. So Gideon is told, the angel, is told to give Daniel the interpretation. And this is where it gets a little crazier. Verse 20. The 2-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. Guess who would take over after the Babylonians? It's recorded in the book of Daniel. It was the Persians and the Medes. They had a joint kingdom. It says in verse 21, the shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first king. Who knows who the first king of Greece is proper? Give it to me, bro.
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great, a singular ruler who conquered everything in his path. That's a little crazy, because even if Daniel had looked out and seen like, oh yeah, Persia's getting pretty strong, maybe Babylon's going to lose. I mean, I'm just going to make this up. I'm just going to predict it a little bit, and I'll look really great. How would he have predicted Alexander the Great? This is going to be after his lifetime, right? He continues on. The 4 horns that replace the first one that was broken off represent 4 kingdoms that will emerge from this nation, but not have the same power. Verse 23. In the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. Verse 24. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation, will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the prince of princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. The vision of the evening and the morning that was given to you is true, but seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future. I, Daniel, was worn out. I lay exhausted for several days. Then I got up and went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding. Daniel went through his equivalent of finals week. He's devastated for several days. This prophecy played out exactly as it was stated, guys. We know the Babylonians were conquered by the Mede-Persian Empire, which was then conquered by Alexander the Great, the first king of Greece. Who took over after he died, guys? He died at a young age. prematurely, some would say, and was succeeded by who?
Wasn't it his 4 sons?
His 4 generals.
General?
He had no sons. And on his deathbed, they asked, who will your kingdom go to? Do you know what his reply was? It's metal as heck. The strongest. Who's going to rule the empire? Whoever's got the guts to take it, bad boy. So those 4 great generals rose up and they seized power. Just like we read about those 4 hordes emerging from the goat after the first one fell out. Dude, that's nuts. Not only that, but it continues on. These 4 great generals, let me see if I have it here. Dang, I think it got deleted out of my notes. I had the names down, it was awesome. It's alright. Well, as the Greek Empire lived past Alexander, the generals rose up, and they had some land disputes and stuff that went on between them. And one general, and his name is ridiculous, it's Seleucus. Seleucus. His kingdom would go on to wage war against another kingdom that was ruled by the descendants of another general, Ptolemy. And it fulfilled exactly what the first part of our prophecy said. They started in the south, or in the east of the empire, of how it stretched. And as they fought the kingdom of Ptolemy within the Greek Empire, they began to march south. So God said that it would extend south and east, and those are the 2 directions they went, and that they would overcome the beautiful place. The beautiful place is also called a place of glory, the glorious land, and that is Israel. And wouldn't you know it, between those 2 empires, as this war was going on, Israel was part of the disputed land. So as their little kingdom started to advance this way, they were fulfilling more biblical prophecy. And eventually this kingdom that was eastern, turned southern and eastern, would be ruled by one of the descendants whose name was, bear with me, Antiochus Epiphanes. And he was known to be a very wicked man, and it talked about him overcoming the powerful. Do you know how he became king? He overcame the powerful. He murdered the king. And he stole the king's rightful heir and held him as a prisoner. And he solidified his rule with bribes and intimidation of the rest of the ruling class. Not only that, but as Daniel had predicted, he was known as a wicked and cruel king. He would rule over more of the empire than any of the other Greek rulers, so he would consider himself superior to all the other kings, like prophecy would say. And again, he would murder those who stood in his way. And he was a profound persecutor of Israel. He also nails the description of this prophecy with the title he took on, Epiphanes, meaning illustrious. He was alluding to himself as a deity. Not only did he see himself as superior, but he saw himself as someone more powerful than everyone else around him. The other thing that becomes a little bit crazy about this is that while he was doing this, he did something very specific that we found in our scriptures, and I'm going to turn my page back over to look at it. The prophecy says this. Sorry guys, I'm looking for it. I think it's on the last page. Nope, it's off more. Same page. Oh, right here. Because of the rebellion, the Lord's people, because of rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it, speaking of this ruler. And in the previous little bit, it talked about him defiling God's temple. And this man actually did 2 things. He did defile the temple of God in Jerusalem, and in addition to that, he made the rule that the Israelites could not bring their daily sacrifices to God. So just as God had predicted, just as Daniel had written down, we see empires change over into the hands that they were supposed to. We see not only that, but what was going to happen to the ruler of the first kingdom of Greece here. We saw that it would be 4 people who would take over the lead, and we saw that of these 4, one of the kingdoms would grow greater than the others, inflict terrible harm on Israel, and dominate its way into 2 different directions that would include the promised land, and all of these things came to pass. Do you guys know what doubters say about this? Do you guys know what the best argument people have in the secular world against this prophecy is? Richie?
It was written after.
It was written after. This is so on the nose historically. This is so yes and amen. This is so perfectly stated and so specific that the best argument people have to combat this bit of prophecy is that it is too good, therefore it was clearly written after when Daniel states it was. Isn't that wild? Yeah, no loophole in the text, no easy out. Just it's so good that it can't be true. So as we talk about this topic, guys, about why Christianity is different than other religions, we shouldn't be ignorant of these facts. As Christians, we should celebrate the fact that we serve a God who's made himself known in various ways. That when we read about these crazy stories, we can actually travel to a place in the world and see some of them. If we're willing to actually read about what's going on sometimes like the archaeological world, we will see year after year that we are digging up stuff in Israel that proves God and his history in the Bible are true. We're finding tunnels dug by kings like Hezekiah. We're seeing seals from people like Jezebel. We're seeing cities discovered and proven again and again. We're seeing natural disasters brought to light. So when we stand before people, when we're asked what makes Christianity different, it should be nothing more than just the verifiable truth of what we're reading. Yes, it takes a little faith to be a Christian. Absolutely. Yes, you're going to face times where you don't know what to do. Yes, there's going to be times where God asks you to do more than you can on your own and have faith that he'll get you through it. But no, the Bible is not a book of fairy tales. No, Christians are not being asked to just blindly, stupidly, just jump into it and hope for the best. No, we're not sitting here working for a job wondering if we're going to get a paycheck. We serve a God who has made himself known in a variety of ways. Whether it be, again, extra-biblical texts that confirm figures, times, dates, and people. Whether it be accounts of historical events that were totally unknown up until we dug them up. Or modern-day prophecy like, again, Israel becoming a nation again after World War II that we can see on film. It's craziness. We should be able to look at our faith and understand that we are planted on something that is unique. Something that makes the claim of being the one and only and also has proofs to back it up. Amen? I want to open up to you guys. Do you guys have any other questions about this topic? Do you guys feel like we did a good enough job answering some of these questions? Was it too thorough? No, we're okay? Perfect. I want to ask you guys one more question. Of course, we're doing our Q&A stuff right now. And we had a dead-up tie. 2 dead-up ties, actually. And I need this room to help me solve what we're going to teach on next. Because next week, am going to be in Seattle, and I need to write this message kind of on the go, so it's not good for me to wait until the last minute to figure out what we're doing. So, we have 2 options for the first place tie, and 2 options for the second, and I'm going to give you guys a bit of information that might help to elevate one of them. So, we have, should we study about how to get closer to God, or should we study next week about the Catholic Bible versus our Bible and what the differences are? So I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Who thinks we should do growing closer to God? Who thinks we should do Catholic Bible versus our Bible? That one won by a landslide. Okay, cool. That was the one I was hoping for, guys. I've done like 70% of a study on this one, so really excited for that. Also, we have a secondary tie. The secondary tie is church shopping. What should we be looking for in a church? The other one is grief in the life of a Christian and counseling through that grief. Who thinks we should do church shopping? Who thinks we should do Christian grief? Beautiful. Now I'm going to ask you guys this. We could do how to get closer to God, or we could do that grief one. I'm going to tell you why I'm going to give the grief one just a little bit more credence. I got to talk to a really cool person. A really cool person that I got to know in Los Angeles. And this person has a testimony that I couldn't fathom living through. This person has a one-of-one testimony as far as people I've met. They went through tragedy after tragedy for most of their adult life. I'm talking about for like 12, 15 years, consistently, of disappointment and of the option of turning to God and going, how could you? Or standing fast. And this person helped to mentor my wife as a young worship leader. This person helped to encourage me as a worship leader and helped at events that I did. And this person was even abused and mistreated by the church, in some people's opinion, and yet stood strong and said, I want to serve God and He is real. And this person agreed to come on and talk with us, kind of like we did a couple years ago, or 2 years, last year I guess. We had a friend of mine up here on the TVs. This person said, I will absolutely come over and do a video interview with you guys, like a Skype call. And you guys can ask me anything, and I will share my testimony and what God has done in my life and some things that helped me get through my grief as a Christian that felt like they were pulling me away from God. So, next week, 100% Catholic Bible. The week after that, would we rather do how to get close to God, or would we rather talk to this really cool individual? How to get close to
I
God?
have a comment. real quick.
Please.
That week is the week of Christian Fellowship's Fall and True Weeks. Then people aren't getting Spirit.
Or you could get sick. I mean, either or. Okay, so tell you what then. We'll push it to 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks, so that way we don't miss out, so you guys get to be here with us. Is that cool? Alright, because we love you guys and we don't want you to miss it. So, we'll do that. Next week, Catholic Bible versus Christian Bible. Don't worry, Catholics, we love you. Next week after that, drawing closer to God, because you guys will actively be doing so on your retreat. Amen. We'll be right there with you. Yes and amen. And then next week after that, we'll talk to this really wonderful, amazing, inspiring Christian. And then we'll do church shopping. Sound good?
What's his name?
Wow, that's awful sexist of you to ask what's his name. You just assume, Richie? You just assume? I'm not telling you. It's a secret, bro. That's a secret, bro. Oh, dang, you're bringing that into the church now? Huh? Let's go to our heads and pray. Lord, I thank you, God, for tonight, and I pray that despite the shortness of time for me to prepare, that everything came out good, Lord. I pray, God, that you bless us, God, and that we be students, that we really do seek out the truth, Lord. That we would not only be studious about reading the Word, God, but about studying why it's true and what makes it valid. I thank you, Lord, that we've been taught in this day and age to have a strong faith and to rely on you, Lord. But I pray that we not also grow lazy, Lord, that we not find excuses to just be armchair Christians, Lord. I pray that we be active, seeking out the things that are happening around us that point to you. I pray, God, that we would have a good answer in defense of our faith for those who don't believe it. And that we'd have a good answer, Lord, if someone were to ask us, how do we know what we're doing is true? Make us powerful men and women of you, Lord. Help us to follow after you in strength and authority. Not, Lord, just hoping to cling on tightly enough to save ourselves. Make us evangelists to those around us. Make us impactful